Awesome. Well, I'm going to try to get straight to the audit piece. I will note I might be looking to organize the HR committee of the City Council to talk about performance pay and the performance review process. Believe it or not, we're about a year into when I established SMART goals for all the managers. We've passed some performance pay, moving from the COLA system to a performance-based pay adjustment system. So this is the first year for that. Like a lot of foundational work here, I think I was pretty surprised that there was no uniform performance review system. And those are obviously important for any organization. As a lot of times I say to folks, you do good work, you'll get more work, and you'll get paid for more work. And you do substandard work, there'll be a standard that's already been set, and we can kind of readjust to get things in line. It's, I think, pretty important for all organizations to have those goals and metrics to go by, not just as a disciplinary measure, but so folks know what the success metrics are and the guideposts. I've also been reviewing the personnel ordinance as well, and there's mention of like a pay bracket schedule. I've kind of reviewed, I couldn't find any to go by. I'm assuming, just like we've been publishing all city employee salaries for the last 2 years now. That was really important to me. That kind of fell by the wayside for about 5 or 6 years. So I'd also like maybe the HR committee to also, as we're doing this performance review process, to look at the pay scale schedules, and let's reset those as well. So another foundational work to move forward on, but I'll reach out to, I think John is the, is he still
John
the?
is, yeah.
So hoping John will get some more work out of him before his last time here. And some other foundational work planning, we'll send it over to Ron from RHR for a discussion of the audit, and then we have Sue Lassard, who's come over for some additional support for our finance teams and sort of a review of our systems so that, we don't have audit findings like this anymore. Again, FY24 is about 3 months or 9 months into FY24 when I arrived, and when I read this audit report, that's a very accurate reflection of where we were at then. Some of those areas we've made some progress on, some of them we haven't, and until we're getting towards a perfectly clean audit, I know this team is hell-bent, and this council is hell-bent on getting us back on the right track. So let's have an open and frank conversation, and we're going to keep this transparency train running. With that, I'll send it over to Ron.
Hey folks, Nate, Karen's having some trouble getting in here. Just hold on. Hold on 1 second, Nate. Hi everybody, good morning.
Morning.
Nate, can you resend for some reason? Karen can't get in.
Yeah, I just resent it, sir.
Morning, folks. So I'm Ron Smith, Principal RHR Smith and Company. You got the whole audit team on there, with the exception of Karen. She'll be joining us in a second. And to tell you a little bit about ourselves, I've been doing this for over 35 years. I have the pleasure of working with 92 professionals now. 3 years ago, we were a size of 46. We've doubled in size twice in the past 2 years just because of the profession, the lack of auditors, and certainly our volume of workload. So it's a tough business out there, and certainly with the city of Ellsworth and some of its struggles, we've experienced many struggles, in the world of government with our other governments, municipalities, counties, waters, wastewaters. So some of Ellsworth's struggles that it's experienced certainly aren't alone, out there for sure. So you have the 6/30/24 audit in front of you, and Nate, would it be better? Can they see my screen if I share it?
Yeah, I should be able to see it.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, maybe if you could zoom in a little bit. Maybe see if I can pull that out.
Oh, yeah, we see a grid with small dark numbers.
How's that, folks?
A little more if you could.
How's that?
Better.
Better, yep.
Okay. So I'm just going to start from the top, work over left to right. General fund's the one that we're going to be talking about. That's the city. Got a couple of problem areas that we've talked about in the past, capital projects being one, and we can talk about the details, of that one, and then a few statements down below. We'll be talking about wastewater and water, which has been a conversation piece, in past audits for the city as well. So on June 30, 24, the city had, the best way I can say it, you owned about $10.5 million worth of assets, of which cash and investments were about $2.2 million, okay? You had commingled funds between the school and capital projects at that time and other grants and projects of the city, that goes on of about $6.1 million that your system commingles and keeps track of who it owes money to. And then conversely, down below is the other end of money that you pay on behalf of other funds because your money is pooled. And the due to other funds of $3.7 million, I'm about halfway down the page, you all. In combination with the rest of what you owe at the city for 2024, you've got about $4.6 million worth of fund balance as of 6/30/24. And that's down a little over $600,000 of last year, because one of the things that we were able to do through this 6/30/25 is really take kind of a deep dive, even with all the trials and tribulations, take a deep dive of some of the transfers, that were sitting in your general fund that were restricted to go to, whether it be TIFs that you have at the city, to capital projects. And really, that was one of the big reasons, is just kind of the combination. Instead of restricting the money, in the city's general fund as we've done in the past, we literally put it where it belonged, you guys, in the TIFs, the capital projects. So that's residing in funds, off to the right, of the city. So $4.6 million based on a city operating budget, I'm scrolling down here, of approximately, with transfers out, with school department and all that, you've got about $16 million. You've got about 30%, of fund balance, somewhere between 25 and 30% of where you average your fund balance of your operating budget, through 6/30/24. And that's certainly and I'm not sure it exceeds where we want you to be, but it's definitely at a benchmark that typically we see in the world of governments, and typically which is advised by the Government Finance Officers Association and other people that are, kind of the advisors out there in the world of government. That's a good range to be in. So financially, as I've been saying to management, you guys are financially in a good condition, at the city. One thing that we've talked about in the past, is capital projects. You guys are a busy municipality. You got a lot of infrastructure projects going on. You had a lot of debt. That, quite frankly, with the timing differences of when the projects were going on, and the city kind of fronting this money for those capital projects until this debt came in. Typically the debt wouldn't come in till after the project was done. And in many times in the city cases, it was after the end of its fiscal year. So if you look at 6/30/24 and you look at this third column, and I'm going to highlight it right here, your capital projects fund, hold on, I got some pop-up screen here that I'm just terrible at. Here, bear with me, folks. Your capital projects fund is in the hole about $2 million, okay? And I've been saying that number is a little north of about $1 million because of project overruns and things like that. In 6/30, this fiscal year that just closed about 2 months ago, about $1 million of lease payment and debt came in, that will make that number go down, but you still have some, for lack of a better way to say it, overrun capital projects that existed out there, whether or not they were funded 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago through warrant articles or not funded. They're going to be in the hole $1 million in your capital projects. And again, I've been saying that for 3 years. There's a couple, 3 projects that we've identified that look like that they were overrun, at the city. Clearly we've got a recommendation on there to keep track of your infrastructure and your capital projects by project. I know you guys have that right now, but, I think you started off with some bad math. with those funds. But at the end of the day, if this product said 630.25, you'd still have a deficit capital project, of probably north of $1 million because of some certain project overruns. And that's probably one of the biggest eyesores that I see in this product, you all, is the fact that, that fund is clearly, even once you settle up and get your debt proceeds, your lease proceeds in, that fund's going to be in the hole, and that's going to be probably something, that we'll need to talk about settling up on 630.25 audit, just because the city, needs to, quite frankly, take a look at its infrastructure, see the costs, see the overruns, and quite frankly, have an alternative method to fund it. And the only place we see where that can come right now is its general fund. So. And I would say, as far as operationally money coming in and money going out the door at the city, and you'll see the budget to actual. I'm going to talk about the next really kind of big eyesore here, that's gone down, and we fully expect it to continue to go down, because it's been heavily talked about for the past 3 years. But the next big eyesore is the wastewater fund for the city. So last year the deficit was over $3 million. This year it's $2.5 million. And largely that deficit, is created by all the money in infrastructure, that you have, there where all your equity is, all your money's in infrastructure. Your money, how that rolls is if you take everything that you own up here in infrastructure of $19 million and subtract the debt, current and long-term portions, of that, you get your equity in your fixed assets or your infrastructure. So what are we saying? The wastewater department has about $10.7 million of equity, but 13 million of it is in infrastructure, which brings you to an operational deficit of about $2.5 million. And we have definitely talked about that a lot in the past. That number's gone down this year. It's largely contributed to, the investment that you make in your utilities, including wastewater, and depreciation that goes along with it. People don't realize depreciation is a real number. And when I flip to the next page, $811,000, you all, is going to, wear and tear on your infrastructure, that $19 million. And that's a real number. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past, is certainly rates, of course, but more importantly, setting up a capital reserve account for water and wastewater and really kind of having some mechanism to fund that depreciation so that, the day that comes when the superintendent comes to you or something happens with a water line, you've got some kind of alternative mechanism to pay for it. And and the capital reserve fund for water and wastewater, I think, for the city of Ellsworth, as we've talked about in the past, just makes the most practical sense. But you got some work to get there, you all. You really do. So.
Could we pause on that for just a second? I don't know if you have some questions, Steve. I know this was a big one for you, and I've got questions too, but.
Well, I've been bitching about the wastewater for 4 years. And I've heard this 3 times now, and it's time we dealt with it.
Yeah, so we do have a capital reserve for wastewater. I think it's, I don't want to just say offhand, it's like 700,000. It's one of the larger ones we have. But could you explain more about that deficit, Ron, and how do you solve that? I know in some ways that you mentioned in the past in the city when they redid that plant, like they used general fund dollars to.
Everybody see what I'm highlighting right here, the net investment in fixed assets? Really what that is, it's your net value. Not that you can get any money for the pipes in the ground, the treatment plants or anything, but based on what you paid and based on obsolescence and depreciation annually, that's about $13.2 million when you factor out the debt. And you say you've got $600,000 to $700,000, and Charlie, here's the best way I can explain it, okay?
Yep.
If you've got $700,000 sitting in a capital reserve account, which you do, okay? I'm telling you, annually, $800,000 of obsolescence is happening to that. Is happening to your infrastructure out there. So that $700,000 doesn't even cover, 1 year of it being obsolete, with our science that our profession says, those pipes in the ground, the filtration systems, the pumping stations, they're losing value. You're gonna have to replace those sometimes. And what we're not saying is you should fund that $811,000. What we're saying is it's a real number. And typically, when you go out and get grant matching funds or things like that, they require 10 to 20% of a contribution. So I think that it would be prudent to have a capital plan that would outline your water, wastewater projects down there, when proposed maintenance going to be and upgrades are going to be, what year that they're physically going to hit, the city's chart, and when they do that, depending on the cost of those things, and how many of those projects that you've got, because many of these projects come with a big price tag, so that's why they spread out project 1 in year X, project 2 in year Y, or a combination of both years. You got to make sure you got enough reserve money, and that $700,000, could be the match for maybe 1 or 2 projects, but not definitely enough, for all probably of what the needs are going to be after you assess, what this capital plan looks like. So I usually base it on 20% of that number that you're looking at right now should be going into reserve annually for your utility districts. Charlie?
Okay. I think we are at, from the budget, we are doing 20% in the wastewater, not in the water. Actually, the water this year, for the first time, we did, because water didn't have really any capital reserve accounting. But I'm getting you more now. We're basically, the rates we're charging, the income, it's not that we're losing that much money in expenses, but the depreciation over the long term is like, hey, you're going to get a balloon, this infrastructure is going to fall apart, and then 10 years from now, you're going to be in the position that we were at previously, and you're going to have a huge payment due to get all these water and or wastewater infrastructure up to snuff because you weren't accounting for the depreciation year by year.
Charlie, is Tammy in the room?
Tammy's not. She's on the. Oh, not Moat. No. Not. We don't have Tammy
Yeah,
Moat
so-
here this morning.
Yeah, so Charlie, I know that she brought up a couple of factors, back when she was finance that kind of were contributing to that, but we're getting on a little older, after, the removal of some of what those factors are. But I know that she raised a couple of, points, valid points, but again, the city needs a plan, to address this because, it's not going away, folks. It's just not going away.
The city needs to charge more money for truck-delivered sewer.
And then there's also the fact that the city doesn't pay any of its sewer bills as a city entity. The school doesn't either. So that's probably contributing a bit here too. And but so we'll definitely take a bigger look at that one. But thank you, Ron. That's very helpful.
Well, just on that point,
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is we need a capital improvement plan for sewer and water. And am I correct that that's a part
And
of
is
what
that
we're
part
work-
of what's underway?
Yes,
Yes.
they're included in that.
So in my notes, it's like, what is the update on due date, updates on broadly on the capital investment plan?
We are having our kickoff meeting on the 16th, and that includes interviews with each department head, and facility tours on the 17th. And we're still on track for February due date.
Great, so then it'll be something we'll have in front of us as we get into the budget for next year.
Right.
And we can start
Yes.
tackling this.
Yep.
And the street scan process is happening in parallel. So that's been underway. They've already done the sidewalks. We just finalized the GIS layer, which the car will then come out in early October and map that.
Great.
And Ron, was this a big part of the audit bond kind of downgrade too? You mentioned previously.
Yeah, they came back. They dinged you, Charlie, for sure. On just wastewater. I don't know why it wasn't addressed. 4 years ago. But one of the reasons why they dinged you is not just because of the deficit. And what we tried to explain to them is that the good faith and credit of the city of Ellsworth covers any deficit. I mean, you had to go out to referendums to borrow that money. Charlie, I believe it was 2 years ago that Moody's, downgraded your bond rating because of that deficit. Why they didn't do it in year 3, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I don't know. The information was the same. I'd argue it was even worse, then. for what it was. But yeah, that's a big reason why, Charlie, they downgraded your bond rating, for
Yes.
sure.
So this one isn't just about, future planning, it's about if we're gonna get our bond rating back up, we've gotta account for that wastewater deficit.
And where I'm going on this page, you guys, just bear with me 1 second here. You've got various debts for your utility funds, your enterprise funds, that we have, here on your books. And they're in pages, 47. They start on pages 47 to 49 that are attached to, water and wastewater. And typically, I always say 3, 5, and 10 years is kind of, I won't say ideal, but about as close to ideal when you develop your capital plan. When you do that, you want to look at, and I'm on the page right here, right now, and I'll highlight it. You want to look at when this debt falls off your books to coincide it with your capital projects. And typically, that was what happens in the world of government, is that they design, a capital plan based upon projects that happened in the past when that debt gets retired and saying, hey, oh well, time to do another project again here, because that's what the standards say, and the standards usually don't lie. Usually when one of those projects has a lifespan of 20 to 25, 30 years, depending on, what the project is, that's usually the life expectancy of the bond. When that bond falls off, usually that government's scheduling another project down the road to coincide with that to replace that bond. So may I suggest when you do your capital plan, look at your debt portfolio on this page and definitely look and see, when some of that debt is going to get retired, and more importantly, when the bond is going to get retired.
And
So-
that is part of the brief for the capital improvement planning project is, analysis of the debt service schedule. Also note on our current bonds for the roads and piece, I know it's the useful life, but also keeping in mind that, our debt service capabilities as well, because we're kind of, have to do both things.
One of the things I always like to show, is, the money that comes in, the non-local taxation money that runs through the city. And the city annually puts about $4 million, through, in federal funds, a lot of it due to the school, but also a lot of it, due to the coronavirus, some of these projects and upgrades that you have, whether or not EPA, USDA, Department of Justice with some of these public safety grants that you guys have, that you guys get a lot of money outside, the city, about $4 million, worth. And quite frankly, that raises the complexity of this audit, puts a lot of strain on the infrastructure, I'm sure, as Nate can tell you, with just the tracking of these volume of grants that we have, and one of the things that we've done is literally the number of federal compliance programs annually that have to be audited has gone from 1 to 3 to 4 now at the city because of the volumes of these dollars. Usually half of them are associated at the school, with the rest of them being at the city. But this is what we're seeing in the world of government right now. And I don't think it's going to not continue. I think that we've all heard kind of what this presidential administration's doing and, really kind of what the long-term and short-term ramifications are going to be on education and some of these other special projects that were funded with the Build Back America package back in 2021, November of 2021, as I recall, whether or not that's going to be sequestered, any of that money. The money is still coming. I think that there might be a pause and a delay on it just to make sure it's going for the right, for lack of a better word, projects. But that money's still coming, and I just think over the next 5 years, that there's still going to be this influx of federal funds, that's going to be coming through the city and really, quite frankly, any other government, that's out there right now and in the business, for public safety, roads, things like that. We're seeing a lot of money out there. We've seen a delay, since April, but I fully suspect, and talking to some of my colleagues at the bond bank, we're starting to see some of that money be released. Some of these programs start being offered back up again. But federal funds are here to stay, you all. They're here to stay. They're here to stay for the next 4 to 5 years, and I would expect that the city, will be in line once it puts its capital plan together, banging on doors to get some of this money.
Absolutely, Ron. I also know Danielle Rich, who's coming as the Director of Planning and Urban Development. She is coming from a big federal grant agency that distributed these grants, or grants all over New England, and has an enormous background here. And she's going to take charge of the whole grants management process in coordination with Sarah on a lot of the capital improvement and kind of making sure those pieces line up. It's one of the surprises coming here. There was no like centralized grants management systems, so we're working on that. We had some funding from this FY26 budget towards that system as well. But I'd love it. And first of all, thank you also, Ron and Tammy, and I think we have Kathy on here too. I mean, they're teams that, they've been working with Nate and Ashley and, coming in and helping us dig out of this hole, and doing incredible work. But before I know we get to Sue and to kind of talk about, hey, how do we build the type of capacity and team that can make sure that, none of this happens again, so that we have, that the audits are much cleaner for these groups. I would love you, I know these are complicated pieces, but to talk a little bit about, not that I want to, but the overages by departments, and kind of where you can find that. I think that was one of the other surprising things upon arrival was, hey, what's our budgeted to actuals by departments, by other pieces? And like the answer essentially when I arrived was, we don't know. Like we did a halfway transfer of one tech system to another, and there's really no way to track. I know over the last year we've been, now that we've implemented the new system, but that was one of the other audit findings I thought was important in here on just what was put in the budget and then what departments actually spend weren't tracking kind of one-to-one.
And Charlie, if I could just pick it up from there, and I know Sue's got some conversation, but I'll just pick it up from there a little bit. Here's what I would say. This 2024. I mean, clearly the city's had some problems. Clearly the city processing infrastructure, kind of the way it did business years ago. A lot of that institutional knowledge is gone now. You've had a lot of turnover in finance. You've gone to a new financial software. Certainly couldn't have happened probably at a worse time, to move, into that software. Back in October, when this process started, it's fair to say, as you guys started delivering us information, none of the information, and I'll say it again, none of the information talked to anything. It didn't reconcile, and that's a big problem. That tells me if Charlie or Nate or City Council wants to understand what it's got in this capital reserve project and its TIF reserve, or what it's got in its general fund balance to reconcile some of the deficits and some of the holes that were created that you are digging, yourself out of, right now, that information's not available. And that's probably the thing that I would stress the most, right now is you've got to make that information available and accurate, timely, you all. And I know that this administration's inherited a lot of these problems, but that to me needs to be the primary focus, is looking at what you look like today and seeing what you need for capacity there, because I would urge you to add some accounting capacity at the city, but literally, looking at what you look like in the mirror today, because I think that there can be much more efficiencies and things streamlined with how you're doing business here today, because I think you have no choice. You've got to streamline that for tomorrow. And our concern is you're probably in August of 2025 right now that's just ended, and some of these reconciliation matters, many of them still exist right now, so there's some work that needs to be done, at the city, and, and really, that's really kind of the all hands on deck effort that we had with Nate, back in, January, February, just to say, okay, we got some work to do, we're gonna help you do it, but, this is something, that you're gonna have to address in the future, and the time is now, you guys, so.
Yeah, and Ron, if you could just kind of show where like the line items, so as council knows where to find this. I know these audits are huge on, kind of where we ended up by departments, but to reference that point too, I think it kind of limits the city and the council to have good information. You probably noticed that I've never come to council and said, hey, I'd like to do this new project and we should use undesignated fund balance. Ron talked about 4.6 million in undesignated fund balance. Like, to me, that doesn't really exist until we're truly reconciled.
Right.
And I was surprised that,
public safety and police was probably the, for lack of a better way to say, the biggest one. So here's kind of a statement, a portfolio, Charlie, a snapshot of where some of the issues were with your budget to actual for the city during the course of the year. And this is when I say reconciling, this is the one you really got to stay on top of, to make sure that, that there's a budget there for a reason, and when that budget starts going over, when is it going over and what's causing it? And that's really the concern, you all, is that those firewalls got to be in place and better policed, at the city, and this was just a tough year. Like I say, you couldn't have picked a worse year to implement a new software. That put just about every bit of strain that it could have on your finance department to really kind of, put this together, which is why we offered Nate that hand to, help him put this together. And we're just looking to avoid this again going forward. So that's it, Charlie. It's on page 97 to look at that portfolio. And then, there's the school, that we have right here. But somewhere in here, Charlie, just bear with me.
Yep.
And I always say, read the back first. When you start on page, Charlie, this is all your pension. When you start, Charlie, on page 109 and work backwards, it will give you the deep dive of everything, of what you budgeted to what actually came through the door or went out the door. And for all the funds, Charlie, for your general fund with all the departments attached to it, for all your grants, starts on page 110, Charlie, going backwards, and that's really where all the details are.
Yeah, and thank you, Ron. I've gotten better and better as I've read your great audits here. And yeah, I know this is kind of a format that you have to follow for the state kind of auditing process.
Yeah.
You'd wonder why don't they make this so much easier at the top? But that's, to me, upon arrival, that when you ask, what's the budgeted actuals in these areas, it wasn't until, a year and a half later that we're able to say, oh, that's what it was. Here's the $1 million overage on.
And Nate can hop in here, because again, this was the challenge last year. I'm showing you your revenue section of your general fund budget. This resided in 2 places last year and resided with about 4 to 5 different financial softwares, generating the math that goes on these papers. What happened is somewhere, and Nate, you can correct me if I'm wrong, for the first half of the year, that information for the first half of the year for the city had to be converted and bridged over to your new financial software, and mapped. And many of the accounts that we thought that we had, but when it doesn't map and there's not an account, that creates a problem, creates a huge reconciliation problem. So literally 2 financial softwares had to be married, during the course of the fiscal year. And I'd say that was probably the worst thing, that we, auditing and Nate, accounting really kind of had to deal with, was really kind of that reconciliation of those marriages of those 2 softwares, but you got 4 or 5 other softwares where you got these independent businesses out there in the city, these grain silos, I call them, being a farmer by nature, that exist, which all are attached to their own software. And to get that into the primary software, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of hands that touch it. And that's really where I would focus on, really for some efficiencies is outside of that. But I can tell you there was a Herculean effort, with us and Nate to really kind of marry those 2 softwares. But that was a big problem in 2024 that we hope is less of a problem in 25.
Yes.
And I know Patrick has to leave a little early for a pre-meeting. We'll continue the conversation, but I do want to get a little bit of soup before Patrick has to leave. And I know Ron's going to come back for the city council meeting as well, so we can, I'll probably send this video out to the councilors who weren't here so they can get some background, but, and councilors can think about things and maybe ask more questions then. I think we'll maybe send it over. I think it's a good point, Ron, on just what we have to build so that this doesn't happen again. And we have that data. I know, Steve, you've been here probably the longest, and you, for a long time, said you keep asking questions, and there would be nothing really there. And to me, I think think a lot of that is because this was like the news. The answer was, we don't know. And we've gotten better over the last year. We've had the Finance Fridays. Now, we're still thinking of a word for the Thursdays now, where we track actuals to budgeted. The software it should be easier in 25, but as you mentioned, Ron, like, this isn't, hey, we're in great shape now, and send over the information now for FY '25, which just concluded in July 1st. Like, we still have to better connect our systems, better connect our policies and procedures, better connect our reconciliations, especially on the tax side of things, and water and wastewater. And Suze Lassard, the former Bucksport town manager and one of the probably foremost experts in municipal budgeting here in Maine, has been reviewing our system. And I'd love to send it over to Sue to talk a little bit about how that's going and some of the challenges and progress that you're seeing.
Thank you. So I sort of divided this project into three pieces. The first is I've met with all of the department heads of the city, as well as management and your auditors, to get a picture of how departments see their interactions with finance and sort of figure out where everything lives in the city, because what became readily apparent early on is your financial operations are spread all over the place here. They're not centered in one, they're somewhat siloed in various areas, and there wasn't a connection between them that recognized that although tax collection was here and sewer and water was here, that finance had the responsibility of ensuring that those funds coming into the city were reconciled, that they're your largest income stream into the city, and the pace at which they're collected sort of dictates how you can spend your money. You start a year in July 1, you haven't sent out a tax bill, you're still spending money right along. So until you start tracking your larger revenue streams, you really have to sort of keep an eye on you don't go buy a truck in July, I guess is the easiest way to, but everyone that I talked to was very interested in finding better ways. There are some procurement and procedural things that create bottlenecks for departments in their purchasing, that create an enormous load on your senior management people to be doing things that are not senior level management duties in the way things are set up, that are somewhat low-hanging fruit. That in this next piece, you'll see some recommendations for some changes to the way, but the reconciliation piece is training in the software that everyone now has. There's been enough turnover that clearly there's not a good understanding citywide of how it all works from one department to another, depending on what they're doing and what type of software they're using. So that training, I had great conversation with your IT people who seem to be extremely, extremely capable and and honestly doing things that are not IT related. They're carrying things that I wouldn't consider IT related responsibilities, and that may more appropriately reside in finance than in IT, in terms of, because in essence, finance is the hub of the wheel. If it's money in any way, shape, or form, finance has to have some finger on how that's working, and right now that's not the case. And so in this first figuring out where everything is and who's doing what has been very educational, and explains some of what has happened with your audits. If you have silos where people are so separated in what they're doing, the integration of information that's necessary for finance to perform well doesn't doesn't work. And so that piece is a big one, and getting everyone on the same page, understanding what finance's role is. Finance is sort of the gatekeeper, you know. If there's a bad guy in a municipal position, or girl, it's finance, because they're the ones that are, that are giving you the good or bad news about whether or not you have the capacity to do a project, or to fund those kind of things, so that the council and management can rely on that information to make good decisions. If nothing's reconciled in your community, you can't make a good decision, because you don't know where you are.
We've experienced that.
What's that?
We've experienced that frustration.
Well, you know, I'm stating the obvious, but the
It
good
needs to be
news is
stated.
this is not brain surgery. This is not brain surgery. The biggest piece is helping everyone understand what their role is. You know, the finance has all new people, there's new management, you've appeared to have had somewhat of a revolving door for a while in some areas, and when institutional knowledge goes out the door en masse, and you have everybody coming in knowing how everything should be, isn't an automatic event. And until now, I don't think there's been a concerted effort to say, okay, what is our job? What are we supposed to be doing? What are the things that have to be done in finance every month, every week, every day, in order for us to get to a budget process where Charlie can come in and say, our undesignated fund balance is XYZ, no department is overspent in their line items, we are, you know, those are the things that I am hoping that this review and these recommendations will help the city to do, and training people how to do reconciliations. Municipal accounting is not like business accounting. Things aren't even on the same side of the ledger. It's explaining that is sometimes a little tricky, but it's true. And so helping your staff learn these reconciliation processes is, I'm meeting with Nate and Ashley next Wednesday to go over some reconciliation procedures for water and sewer. I am not in the weeds yet. I haven't looked at the books. I don't know if that's going to be an easy or a hard thing. I know how to do reconciliation, but I have to have some good number to start with in order to be able to move forward. And I'm looking at you, Ron, and Kathy and Tammy and Karen about if the June 30th, 2024 is a good number in terms of those items. I can start with that and we can move forward from there, because I know that none of that has been done for 24, 25, and so, you know, you're not ready for an audit because your records aren't reconciled. But getting that done, that done, plus your cash is, it's kind of
The base.
well, that's the priority. You have to get those things. And the other, as I said, training, the reconciliation piece, and some amendments to your procurement and review process, which is, I have never been in an organization where senior management had to touch an invoice or a PO 4 times. And
Sarah and I met with a procurement expert, a nonprofit group that does this, and they're trying to gather some information just to see kind of where we're at. And they're like, do you have like kind of some things that you can look at for your procurements and like list of, just like, no, there's no such thing as a master Excel sheet of all the procurement that's been done over the past 5 to 10 years. And she was like, huh, Now, granted, this organization works with usually much bigger cities that have these kind of processes, but it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be,
No, there's checks and balances and everything, and those are very important, but when it's set up the way it is now, it creates bottlenecks, which makes it difficult for departments to do their work. If you are sending things around 4 times and they can't move forward to get something done, that's not an efficiency. That isn't helping anybody, and it's not furthering the mission of the city, and it's not improving your financial situation.
And I think it hurts the
It's
public.
creating a lot of busy work, to be honest, for people that could be better used. You have 2 people full-time entering invoices for the city. That's an inordinate amount of time for one community. Some of their time could be better spent if things were more efficiently organized in your procurement area. So again, now, I'm into some of the, I think you should, things that are next. But the next piece is what I call in the weeds, and that starts next.
Sue, if I, sorry
Yes.
to interrupt, I have to leave, but I just want to thank you and the auditors for coming, and I think we're in really good position because we know the problems and we have the people to fix them. So I'm really happy to have you here and the auditors, and I'm excited to keep working on this. So I apologize I have to leave, but thank you so much.
Okay, well,
We want to carry on, we want to hear,
yeah. And please
continue.
well, as I said, the second piece is in the weeds. I have talked to people, because everybody has to understand their connection to finance, for finance to be able to operate effectively, and there's some missing pieces in that puzzle, and it, again, because the city's kind of gone from a crisis management through its finance to how is normal operations going to look? And normal operations can't look like crisis management. There has to be procedures, processes, accountability levels, the trust and verify kind of checks and balances that are associated with a functional and well-operated financial system. So in the weeds means I need to see how badly out of balance things are. I need to take information that the auditors have provided and look in the system to see, if taxes haven't been balanced in I don't know how many years, how off is the general ledger from the list of outstanding property taxes? Not for this year, because this year just went out, but for prior years that have still not been paid. And the same for sewer and wastewater billing, those kind of things. And then finally, that cash ties out to your bank reconciliation on a monthly basis, that your bank balance and your adjusted GL, after you take your ending balance and add and subtract checks that are still outstanding, et cetera, are the same number. And then you can begin to count on the fact that things are right. If you're minding the money, everything else kind of falls from that. And then also, what kind of checks and balances can be installed in the system that won't just say, hey, you don't have any money in that line account when you try to do it, but say, hey, you can't enter it. There's a hard stop if you're going to go over your budget. It would require some review or permission from somewhere else if you're going to exceed a budget line item. And that doesn't exist right now. And so it will say, hi, there's nothing here, but it won't stop you from doing it anyway. And that's another sort of piece that is. But in talking to IT, you're very fortunate that you have someone in IT who formerly worked in one of the systems that you have. He's very familiar with that, and that talked about the connection pieces between software that they say exist, but everyone may not be conversant with because not everyone has attended trainings or not everyone has done follow-ups, and so some of the it doesn't work is as the IT Nate had a great statement. He said, software is a tool. It doesn't replace the need for you to know how to do your job. It's a tool for you to use to do your job. And that's exactly what. So, and they're very willing to set up trainings or do additional, and there's some that are free and online version of things that people can do too, but. So then the sort of in the weeds, where are you? And then.
Charlie, sorry.
Yep.
We gotta hop on at 9 o'clock. Real sorry, Sue, that I couldn't hear the rest of it. We gotta hop on at 9 o'clock. Charlie or Sue, do you have anything that you need of us?
No, I think, council's got any questions, but I know we're going to see you at the big show for the city council meeting later, so, is there any questions, Nancy, for Steve, for
No, thank you.
Ron in the near term?
Thank you.
So we'll connect each other on like your reconciliation piece, you know, like in the real near future, real soon and near future.
Great,
So,
yeah, and I think that'll kind of be a middle step. You and I can talk about that later, though, Ron.
Take care, everybody.
Thank
Be well.
you.
Yeah, bye.
Anyway, and then third is sort of the overall, this is where you are. These are some recommendations that are low-hanging fruit that can happen now. These are things that can get you closer to where you want to be. And this is, and some recommendations for capacity or how, and I don't mean go hire more people. I mean tying duties to the right people in terms of financial stuff, and making sure that anyone who's doing financial stuff, if they're not located in finance, that there's some review and connection piece because that's where the work is done, that then has to be reconciled by finance. So the goal is to have this by the end of November for the council, and Charlie and anybody else who wants to do it. But again, that's sort of a snapshot of what I've seen thus far, and I want to reiterate how cooperative everyone has been, staff. I'm so impressed. And when I set up times to talk to people were prepared. People had lists. It wasn't a crab session. It was, these are my challenges, or this is what works really well, or, it was a really good, everyone was very open, and that provided some really good information, and there were so many common themes that it's putting together some recommendations and stuff isn't like this one over here and this one over here. The themes were not dissimilar across departments of their challenges and their knowledge or lack thereof in regard to finance and how that all worked. So I think it's just a matter of getting everyone on the bus and understanding where the bus is going and who's driving and who's watching out for, that everyone understands what their role and what the big picture looks like. Because right now, the big picture of what is finance is missing here. That hasn't been your finance department wasn't created, it happened. it happened, because this one was here, and then this one was here, and then this one was here, and then this one was here, and so you need to take a step back and create it the way you want it to be. You have some very capable people that don't necessarily come from municipal backgrounds, so understanding the municipal setup is a missing piece here. And so getting that sort of organized will make everyone's life easier, their life easier, department head's life easier, council and management's life, it's not, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's really, let's get everyone understanding what their roles are, training on how to do those if it doesn't exist, and then moving forward with, so that there's some level of confidence when you're doing your budget or you're doing whatever, that someone's been minding the store. You're not going to see a list of all these accounts that are all badly overdrawn, or a list of revenues that's badly overstated. That's as dangerous to your organization as overdrawing your expenses is overestimating your revenues and not receiving enough to cover the whole budget. So.
This has been incredibly helpful, and I love having this as a kind of a baseline for us to understand what you've been working on and where we're headed. So I really appreciate this overview and the clarity of the 3 steps and where things are. And I think I take it as a good sign that there's consistency in what needs to be fixed. So it seems like taking that on is going to be achievable.
Oh, the good news is it's absolutely achievable. There's no reason that, and the reason that they're common themes is because there's only so many things that can have input. Your software systems you're using, the training and competency of the people that you have doing that, and the communication between departments that allow things not to get to a bad point before, that there's a very open, and people do understand that finance is the hub, that there should be checks and balances on how they can spend money, and that somebody is paying attention to that. And that's an accountability piece, and not that people haven't been accountable, but they've been all rowing their own boat. And there's police and there's fire and there's all these separate businesses, but there's one umbrella. And the umbrella is the city. It's all one team. We've got all these, so everyone has to be rowing in the same boat. You do different things, but same boat. And that appears not to have been the operational style for some time now, and it may be because of high turnover. There's 100 reasons, but the other thing that I've told departments and I've told everybody that I've talked to is that there is no reverse. There's no time machine. There's no going back and all you have is now and forward. And while it's important to understand where you were, it's more important to get to where you need to be, because it doesn't matter how you got here anymore. But you just need to make sure that you set up a system that doesn't allow you to go back where you were prior to. And I think from discussions with Sarah and Charlie and Nate and Ashley and others, that's everybody's desire, is to be in a fully functional and upheaval and lots of creates instability in your organization. And if nobody knows what's going on with the money and nobody knows, it creates instability. It, makes it hard for people to feel safe in their workplace if those things exist. And so all of this is a really good effort on the part of management to to create more stability in your organization, so that, and a path that if somebody walks out or gets hit by the bus, there's processes and identified things in place that someone could step in and know what to do, or where things are, or all those kind of things that has had to be invented since you took over.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of my core here. I know we've talked previously, like, what's the vision, what's the this, and there's a little bit of me that's like, there's some foundational work is number one, and this is, whether the council at some point chooses to move forward with me at the end of my term or not, like, my priority and number one is that this, especially this piece, can be handed, and I've said in some ways that this could be a Mary Poppins situation, that somebody disappears and the work continues, that it's easy to be done. I talked to actually another person yesterday as well that does data kind of software for government, and just like, if you've got the foundation under you, it's just the stress of the organization isn't on that. You can actually move forward. It's not centered in an individual or a set of individuals, or like the processes just need to run smooth.
Right, well, and ideally, you and staff are working on foundational and keep us up to date, and then we can focus on what direction do we want the boat to go in.
Yep.
While you all are
That's something Sue and I is
fixing
also.
the boat, making sure we're all,
And you
we've
can
got good oars.
You can tell why council gets in the operational weeds on a bunch of these things, and I know Sue's kind of mentioned that too. It's like, wow, it's really in the weeds, because you have to, because that you're seeing these operational pieces.
Right, because there's no clarity for us either.
Yep.
So, yeah, we would love to have it so that you all have got what you need for the foundation, and then we focus on the higher level stuff.
And to me too, the important part is just, it might not be the nicest thing to talk about, but people are open and honest, transparent, and that's how you're going to get to the end of the line. It's not the sexiest work in city government. As you said, it's not brain surgery. In some ways, I think it's much harder, because nobody's been trained to be a brain surgeon yet. Whereas the brain surgeons, I know one, you trained for 25 years before you did the work. And yeah, like, what did you say about, we didn't create a finance department, like, it happened.
That was one of the quotes I've recorded. That's a clear one.
And we've had this group here together, for a year and a half now, and what the supports they need and the team and the staff need, that we're not here to point fingers that it's X person's fault. At the end of the line, it's my fault, and if we don't fix it, it's my fault moving forward too. So, I think we're going to build a team and a structure to get the job done here, and I'm really excited about it. And also, as you mentioned, Sue, so Sarah and I aren't just constantly in the budget process and the reconcile process and the hiring you process. Like, I want to free up my time for a whole bunch of other things, so.
Well, some of the things that this isn't, as I said, throwing it all in the air. This is really course corrections that will bring things in line with where they need to be. It's not that you don't have people, that it's not that you don't have software, it's not that you don't have, it's that nobody's put those pieces together. And so yeah, like I said, it's not brain surgery. If it was brain surgery, I would have nothing I'd be nowhere near it, but it is, and your systems and your processes and your how-tos they don't have anyone's name on them. They're set up so that whoever steps into the position has the same, it's not designed for a person, an individual. It's designed for a position, and that is really important. You can't design a system around a person. You have to design it around the organizational needs and what that position has to do.
And to me, that's the core of a well-functioning bureaucracy. Bureaucracy as a term gets a lot of negative connotation, but it was at one point a really interesting innovation. It means seats of power. It's not people. that are there. It's the design of an institution that is timeless. You know, the city of Ellsworth has existed for 150 odd years, but now a lot of ways I mentioned to people, it's more of a startup than a 150-year-old organization because the city grew dramatically too. 37% population growth over, you know, a 25-year period of time. That's 27% higher than the state of Maine's average. You know, $700 million valuation increase over the past 5 years. You know, knew this, knew that, and a smaller town system, and then a probably 40% turnover rate over a 2-year period of time in the organization. All the institutional knowledge of those people when it was a smaller city and town. You know, trying to, and like you said, nobody's, and that's what we're doing now. That's the work that we're here now, is to kind of build the system that's right for what we have now.
There's also some of the way the city's operational things are set up like you're a much smaller community than you are.
Yep.
In terms of your financial procedures. You're acting, I don't mean acting in a bad way, I mean your operational stuff is geared to a much smaller entity, and that's what creates the bottlenecks and those kind of things, because what works in a community of 1,500 doesn't work in a community of
9,000, but we service 80,000 people.
well,
and we have 4
you
million.
know, you're 9,000 residents, and you're however many people drive through on a daily basis.
Yeah,
Like I said, it took me an hour to get here today from Bangor, so that's wasn't anticipated, but that adjustment, you know, is another facet in this, making sure it's set up to function in a community that is the size you are and doing the service levels that you do.
Yep.
So. But it's hugely interesting, and Ellsworth shouldn't feel like it's the only community that's financial stuff hasn't been balanced in a long time. The auditors would tell you that there's a great long list all over the place, and much of it's for the same reason. People aren't knocking themselves over to get into municipal government. It's not the easiest place to be.
I think I've been yelled at 25, 30 times. It's the first time in my professional career that just the yelling comes involved a lot.
Only 30 times?
Yeah, Sue, well, you're the tax collector, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Lucky, you're lucky.
Anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions. I really am excited about this because it is so solvable, and I really think that everybody will be happier if your audits don't look like the last one, and you will have better information to make decisions when you're doing your budgets and deciding on capital stuff and figuring out what's going to happen with wastewater and water and all of those things, you know.
I think the other thing, just to highlight, reading newspapers regularly and seeing headlines about nefarious behaviors, we're dealing with training and systems with people with integrity who are trying to do their jobs well. And I think for that to be the problem that we're going to work together to address is satisfying, knowing that other municipalities, again, in the headlines, are dealing with things that are more difficult to address, so.
The people
do
doing
it.
forensic audits have much harder time of it than the city of Ellsworth, so I will tell you.
Yeah, and to me, that's part of the reasons this work is so important, is the reestablishment of public trust. You
Yeah.
take the procurement pieces, we come into that a lot. Hey, this step wasn't followed in the right way, you have this, and Sarah and I hold a lot, and, you know, and Steve's been right in a bunch of these things on this, we should go out to bid on this way, it should have this, but it doesn't have to be that hard, it should be much easier for everybody. It's not malfeasance, it's just misfeasance in systems that aren't properly in place, and in some ways having people at the wrong levels of the organization have to take a bigger role in it.
Yeah.
Because that really establishes public trust. And in some ways too, with these audit pieces, you need that in order to be like, there is no malfeasance. If you have a system that can't quite track all of these pieces in real time, it makes it much more difficult to find the malfeasance. And I haven't come across any of that. If Sue or myself or any of the staff did, I think, to your point, it is a good sign that staff are so open and like, here's the books, help me, I'd like to figure them out, like, I want to do this perfectly. I've never come across somebody with that sense that I'm trying to hide something, or, and if I do, I'll come forward immediately. But we're on the right path here.
Well, and with that, I've got to head out.
All right, thanks,
too.
Nancy.
So thank you for all this, Sue, and for the auditors.
I'd like to throw a couple of pieces out from what I've learned today. I think in some regards, the people in the finance department have been bailing water in a boat that still has a leak. And bailing water is what's had to happen to keep the boat afloat. And I think once the bailing is done and there's a plan to patch the boat, everybody can sail a little easier. And in another analogy to that, those of us that drove here today looked through a big windshield and we glanced at a rearview mirror. And that's how we drove here. We drove looking through the windshield and we glanced at a rearview mirror. And that's really what we're all talking about here today, is we've got to plug the hole to make the boat float. And we've got to focus forward and glance at the background.
I love both of those analogies, Steve. I almost feel like, just to take it a step further, it kind of feels like you're driving in reverse looking through your rearview mirror sometimes here. And that's not an easy way to drive. And then you're looking, but we need to get to the point where we're looking through our windshield, and we do a little glance every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yep, it's still good. We're good there. There's nothing behind me. There's nothing, I know I'm in okay. There's nothing screaming. I love
It's
it.
not unfixable.
And, oh, absolutely not. It is, and as I said, I can't remember who I was talking to this week when I said you're filling in the holes. That's good. And teaching people to stop digging ahead of us. Because if we don't start on 26, this current fiscal year, 25, 26, getting everything right from July forward, we're still digging. You have to stop digging here and continue to fill in back here. And that's the twofold piece of the reconciliation. We need to stop digging, in terms of processes and in terms of those kind of things, because those all contribute to the whole. And once those are changed, then, finishing reconciliations, it's just numbers. And the beauty of numbers is there's always an answer. It's why when I retired that I went to just doing this, which is, I don't want to ever manage a person again in the history of my life. But I'm more than happy I can reconcile until a year from next Tuesday. Because when you get to the bottom, it's matchy-matchy, which is how we refer to everything. So helping Ellsworth get to matchy-matchy for everything is like a really exciting idea for me, because once you're there, you can stay there. You just have to have people know how to keep you there, so. Anyway,
Well,
Any public comments?
thank you all. On that note, I'm going to get back to some of my personnel work, Sue. She missed so much.
Yeah, what a luxury.
what's that?
Yeah, what a luxury.
I only did it for 45 years. I think I paid my dues.